So, Midnight Mass is the new TV show, Netflix original from director, writer, producer, whatever, Mike Flanagan, who's behind some of Netflix's biggest shows and movies, such as Gerald's Game and Haunting of Hill House, which are two pretty good projects from him. Mike Flanagan generally is a guy I am a little bit torn on. He can really make some compelling stuff like Gerald's Game, as I mentioned, Haunting of Hill House I enjoy, but he also can make some things that just simply don't work for me. Dr. Sleep comes to mind, Hush comes to mind, and unfortunately for this show, Midnight Mass, it's a bit of both. So I kind of am torn on this as well.
We tend to dislike mysteries. We feel uncomfortable.
But let's start at the basics. The premise of this 7-episode, hour-long episode show is about a small town on a secluded island that is slowly dying. It's about this town that is being slowly abandoned by its inhabitants. There's not much there for these people anymore. The work is starting to leave with the people, and the occupants are dwindling every day. And things start to change when a new priest comes into town to replace their old one that's apparently sick in a hospital on the mainland. Weird things start happening from there, and that's the story. It's an incredibly simple story, but there are some really interesting things it does with that story, and that's one of my biggest positives and praises to throw at this. I think what it turns into is actually very interesting and took me off guard. Spoilers, but then it takes a hard right turn into being a vampire story, and I really actually enjoyed that. When you set things up so seriously, it takes a lot to make a sharp right turn into something goofy, but it handles it pretty well. And in fact, the vampire idea is typically one that is just goofy, because there are two types of vampires. There's monsters that are vampires, and then like tragic characters that are vampires. People that feel bad about doing what they're doing, sucking people's blood. They feel remorse or guilty for themselves, or they're turned into a complete farce, like in What We Do in the Shadows.
Hey, listen, we're just having a flat meeting upstairs in about 10 minutes. You don't have to come, but I thought I'd extend an invitation to you just in case.
And fortunately, Midnight Mass finds this really sweet spot in the middle of all of it. It takes these vampires pretty seriously and grounds them in the world in a way that works kind of well. There's like scientific backing that they throw onto this too, to explain these vampires and what they're doing and how they're doing it. And I enjoyed that. I think that's a great reveal, a great twist that I actually liked a lot. And the priest at the heart of this, I don't remember the actor's name, but I believe his name's Father Pruitt. He is great. He's sensational, actually. He's the best part of this by far. It's not close. He's the most compelling character out of all of them, because he's a character that you can kind of understand, and you see his struggle. And by the end of it, he goes through this change, this character growth that's incredibly compelling that not many other characters do, which is a negative that we'll talk about in a minute. But Father Pruitt is great. Everything with him I loved. I think he's a very interesting character that has a lot of points that back up how he feels and how he's approaching things that make sense. So I liked that character, and I just wish I saw more of him, because he is so interesting to me. There's reveals with him later on in the show that I don't think I'll spoil, that make him just that much more interesting. I wish that it was just about him, because the main character is essentially this guy who killed somebody drunk driving in a car accident. But I did enjoy his overarching story and the relationship he has with one of the residents in the town, who kind of becomes the main character after he dies. Spoilers. There's another spoiler for you. He takes her out on a boat after he gets turned into a vampire and lets her see him explode in sunlight, which is an incredibly dick thing to do. That's a dick move, bro. You're gonna make this girl you love watch you commit suicide while she has nowhere to run? Why? That's so stupid. That stuff I enjoyed too. There's a lot about this I liked, but it's a 7-hour show, or even longer. And it does not need to be that long. Just simply and honestly, this is 7 episodes, all an hour-ish long, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. And it does not need to be this long. I think you could have removed easily an hour to 2 hours of this and it would have the exact same effect. Mainly, my problem is with how wordy it is. This is just a play. I feel like if this was just a play, it would be better, it would translate better, because there are long sequences that are just monologues. Episode 3 kind of is exemplifying this too. Episode 3 is like 2 characters go to a room, one has a 10-minute monologue, another has a 10-minute monologue, and then it cuts to 2 other characters going to a room and doing the exact same thing. It's like endless monologues. So that's my biggest criticism, is how wordy, how monologue heavy it is. It's like watching Shakespeare, and it doesn't need to be this way. I mean, movies are a visual medium. You can tell a story through visuals. And it feels like more times than not, this show opts to just tell it through words, which I just don't care about. And it made me disengage with it more times than I was engaged with it. There are some incredibly compelling things that happen. I've already mentioned some. But when it screeches to a halt to have a 15-minute long diatribe about death, I immediately check out. You can make that scene 5 minutes. Let's just get it going, get it over with. But it's so long, I just check out and then I go, okay, I'm back, that scene's over, now maybe something will happen. Oh, it's another 10-minute long monologue scene. They just go on and on and on. There's some that work, obviously. These long monologues, there's some that work because they have context. One where this girl who's paralyzed, who's healed, goes to this guy that paralyzed her and has this monologue about forgiveness, and it works because you understand the relationship. And it's actually kept fairly short. But more times than not, these characters will go off on these long tangents to explain simple things. One that comes to mind is when they're trying to scientifically talk about vampires. After our main character commits suicide in front of his girlfriend, which is a dick move, the girlfriend goes to the doctor of the town and says, oh, you must think I'm crazy, because she tells her. And then the doctor goes on this long-winded monologue about how somebody in the Dark Ages decided that washing hands may be better when performing surgery, and he was put in a mental asylum. And she says that, which took me 10 seconds, in like 5 minutes. She just goes on and on and on, and then caps it off with, you're not crazy. Oh, this guy way back when had a revelation, and he was a laughingstock of the industry. I think you had a revelation. I just said that in 20 seconds in a weird voice that no one in the show has. So that's one of my biggest problems. And another one I alluded to is the characters. I found 90% of these characters horrifically unlikable. I don't know why they were written this way. So many of them are just like moody and cynical and downtrodden and so annoying. They just have this really bleak outlook on everything. They're all just ranting and rambling about stuff that I just am so tired of hearing. There's so many of them are just so tiring to listen to. And then there's just some other little things about this show that, like, are so minor they didn't really affect the experience, but they stood out in a negative way to me, so I'll mention them. The visual effects aren't the best. It's a show, so they're not gonna be like top-notch, and most of it's practical, so it hides some of the visuals better, but they did stand out. They're not great whenever they use them. And then the old age makeup, I understand why they used old age makeup, because these old people in the town were de-aging because of vampire blood they're drinking as sacrament. So having a young actor with old age makeup and then just slowly removing it to make them look younger makes sense, but it was distracting. Every time I saw it, I was like, oh, that's just a young actor. Like, it wasn't done particularly well. And then the other negatives, of course, are the pacing, the monologues. It's a little bloated. Some characters are unlikable. But generally, I think it's a solid show. I think it has a lot of atmosphere. I like the turns it takes. It took me off guard more times than it didn't. Some of it's a little predictable, but it was enjoyable for the most part. I think that if you're looking for a moody, atmospheric fall TV show, this is a pretty good one, and you can watch it in a weekend. So I'd say check it out. Again, I'm not a huge fan of it. I love the priest character. I love everything about him, his whole story. Anytime he's on screen, the show is great. But anytime they go away from him, I found myself getting disengaged. So that's Midnight Mass. I'd give it a 6. Mike Flanagan is just so hit and miss for me.